Welcome to the Friday edition of Wine's World, and I'm starting in, well, not exactly darkness, but it is dark out, and I've got all the lights on. And I'm doing this because I wanted to just highlight the fact that behind me I've got a little bit of tinsel, which I actually had in my previous video of last Friday, I believe it was, but I've added some lights. And I just wanted to have them as a background because my topic for today is Christmas decorations. And it's actually, I think, an interestingly complicated issue, and we'll get into it. So enjoy my sparse background and let's get on with decorating. Well, the lighting seems okay, so I'll give it a shot and I'll see how we get along. As I mentioned in my video on the Immaculate Conception, in Argentina we don't really do much in the way of decorating until then, and there's still not an awful lot in people's houses. A lot of people don't have a Christmas tree. They don't give much in the way of presents, and so it's not really the focal point of the Christmas season in most houses. Shops sometimes, and certainly the big mall, Galleria Pacifico, has a big display. But the mall is not really particularly crowded at Christmas time because people are not giving presents. So it's rather low key, and I kind of like that. It's very, very low key in Cambodia because, of course, it's not a Christian country. The only real decorations of any sort are around the hotels where there are foreign tourists, and some of the US-owned franchises like KFC, where they put up some lights and a tree. Car dealerships around where I live have a tree, but that's about it, and that suits me. In the spirit of unpacking Christmas, I want to talk about the logistics of decorating, and for me it's a matter of being slow and steady. As you know, I have my Christmas wreath, and I light a new candle each Sunday in Advent, so it gets brighter and brighter. And until now, we're in the third week of Advent. That was my only decoration, apart from I put up a little bit of tinsel last week, and now I've got my lights. And I'm not going to do much more, partly because I live alone, and partly because it's been my habit since I lived in Argentina. But when I lived in New York, it was a completely different story. But it also started out very slow and steady. Back in 1980, when I first became an assistant professor at the University of State University of New York, I lived on campus, and the campus did not allow Christmas trees or really much of any decoration that was likely to be flammable, for obvious reasons. and so I never had a tree. I'd had a tree growing up, although that was also rather sparse, not because Australians are sparse with their decorations, but because in the 1950s and early 60s there weren't a lot of conifers available. Our Christmas tree was really kind of scraggly. It was more like a branch cut off of a bigger tree, and it was okay for us. We put our presents on it and around it, and that was fun. But when I became an adult, I didn't really do much, and when I was married first and living on the campus and couldn't have a tree, I had to think of something else to do, and my first choice was to make what's called sometimes a kissing bough or a Christmas bough or a kissing ball or a Christmas ball or Christmas crown or whatever. A kind of tangle or crown of greenery, sometimes studded with apples, mistletoe, sometimes with live candles, but I made mine with artificial greenery and electric lights, and you hang it from the ceiling, and you can see that here in the illustration from the first edition of Dickens' Christmas Carol, where Fezziwig is holding his Christmas ball, and up above the dancers is his rudimentary Christmas bough. It's just a tangle of greenery, and that was it. It wasn't until Queen Victoria came to the throne and married Albert, who was German, and she wanted to make him feel at home, and so had a Christmas tree in Buckingham Palace, and that spurred an interest in the general public. They had some Christmas trees before that. It wasn't the first one in England, but it was the first one that made a big show, and everyone went along with it because the tree is a German and Scandinavian practice in countries where there are many more conifers than there are in England. It caught on, and that became the central decoration, and still is, of course. But because I couldn't have one, I had my kissing bough, and then that year, or I think it was that year, may have been the next year, I made a very elaborate gingerbread house, and I used that as my focal decoration, and I put presents around that. But everything happened very, very late in the Advent season because I was busy teaching, and the end of the fall semester is a very, very busy time, so I didn't have much time to do anything until my semester ended, right around now. I had about a week before Christmas to do all my decorating, and that's when I did it. And so that it started right at the precipice of the Christmas celebration itself. So it wasn't like the lights were up for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks so that you got tired of it by the time Christmas rolled around. It was all brand new. And one of the traditions that I'm particularly fond of, which is I think mostly gone into abeyance now, is the practice of bringing a tree into the house but not decorating it until Christmas Eve. In fact, what many parents did was that they would put the kids to bed on Christmas Eve with the bare tree just in the corner. And then when the kids were all suitably asleep, they would then set about decorating everything and putting out the presents and everything, so that when the kids woke up in the morning, presumably the parents still fast asleep, they would come downstairs or come into the living room or wherever the tree was, and there it would be all bright and all the presents there and everything, and it would be all a big surprise. I really like that. I'm not a big fan of having piles and piles of presents sitting around for people to ogle for weeks and weeks until they get to open them. Doesn't appeal. So I used to use the Gingerbread House as my focal point, and here now I use my wreath as the focal point. So that's one possibility. I didn't have a tree for a very long time. I moved off campus, bought a house, my wife and I settled in. We still continued to make more and more elaborate gingerbread houses. The second year we made a barn with a lot of marzipan animals, including a pig with suckling piglets and a dog and some sheep and all of that. And then the next year I made a replica of Carnarvon Castle, and I had a whole scene of painted soldiers and knights and whatnot, which I spent weeks and weeks and weeks painting and dressing in chainmail and see, I used to be a model shipbuilder when I was a kid, and so I was kind of going back to those days. And I remember one of my friends coming over and noticing that the castle was actually a battle scene. And she remarked, peace on earth. But I mean, it was really beautiful, and I did that for many, many years. I'm not about to do it anymore. But it was a way of bringing the changes. Well, then we had a son, and when he got a little bit older, he wanted a tree, so we got an artificial one and decorated it. And I kind of went a little bit hog wild with the lights. I'm really a fan of lights. So we used to call the living room the epilepsy room, because it was just overburdened with lights on every wall, the ceiling, the fixtures, the furniture, everywhere. One of my favorites was a net made of blue lights. The net was designed to go over bushes in the yard, but I hung it on the wall like a fishing net, and I made silver fish which I entwined into the net forever and ever and ever. And as my son got older, he took it upon himself to be the one who decorated the tree. It was his favorite thing to do, and that was splendid until he left for college and I left for Argentina, and things just changed. Now, there's a poem by Robert Herrick called Various Things. I'm not sure it had an actual name when he wrote it, but it's usually now called Ceremonies for Candlemas Eve. And Candlemas, which is February 2nd, it's the day in the church when they bless the candles for the year, and it also celebrates the purification of Mary after the birth of Jesus, and is an important ceremony in the church, not particularly in secular terms. But even down to the 19th century, Candlemas was considered to be the very end of Christmas. And that's when people took down their Christmas decorations. And you can imagine, when I used to decorate my living room with all these lights, that taking them down had a kind of disappointment to it. It's like the house has gone back to being rather dull and workaday. Well, Herrick understood this. He understood that in his day, everyone put up sprigs of holly and mistletoe, kissing bough, and all that kind of thing. And that when you take them down, you can have a sense of emptiness. And so he wrote this poem that essentially said, don't be so disappointed. Think of decorating the house as being a whole year-round event with different decorations for different times of the year. And his poem starts off, down with the rosemary and bays, down with the mistletoe. Instead of holly, now upraise the greener box for show. The holly hitherto held sway, let box now domineer, until the dancing Easter day and Easter's Eve appears. And it goes on, but he's basically saying that every season should have its decorations, and you should think of everything as being seasonal. And his last line, having trouble remembering it, it's the middle of the night right now. Thus times do shift, each thing its sway doth hold. New things succeed, as former things grow old. Wonderful sentiment. And I like that not only because it talks about decorating, but it also speaks to the cooking, which I'll get back to on Tuesday. Because I like to eat things that are seasonal. And so at Christmas time, I make my mincemeat, and I'll show you here how it's coming along. It's maturing very nicely, and I keep it out mostly. The days have been very cool here of late. I mean, when I say very cool, I mean they only get up to 24 degrees centigrade as opposed to 32. That is in the 70s as opposed to in the 80s Fahrenheit. And so it's okay, and I stir it every day, and the smell is really beginning to percolate into my apartment. And it's the smell of Christmas. I don't want to eat mincemeat at other times of the year. I don't tend to use what I think of as Christmas spices. I use some of them, but I like to think of allspice, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon as Christmas spices. So I have lots of mincemeat, Christmas pudding, Christmas cake at Christmas. And then at Epiphany, I finish off what I haven't eaten up until that point, and then I put it away. And I change my spice palette for the early January. In early January, I used to make marmalade, because that's the time when oranges and lemons and other citrus fruits are readily available in the United States. And so that was my next cooking enterprise. Well, I've already done that, so I'm not going to repeat it when January comes around this year. But but that was my focal point of seasonality. Eat the things that are seasonal and put them away once the season has passed. It's a little bit tough here in Cambodia because there aren't really 4 seasons. There are 2. There's the wet season and the dry season. The temperatures remain pretty much the same all year round. But fruits do come and go. There are times when mangoes are very common and other times when they're not. Not really fully aware of the botany of fruiting in the tropics. It seems to be tied to the rainfall, but I'm not really sure how it works, because the trees bloom 365 days of the year, and there are fruits available like coconuts and bananas 365 days of the year. But in countries like the United States or Britain, there are definitely seasons for the fruits, like in May and June you start getting strawberries, and there's a big flush of strawberries, and then it's over. So you pig out on strawberries, and then you let it pass. And in the autumn, the apples ripen, and my son and I used to go to an orchard and pick bushel baskets of apples and take them home and make all kinds of apple crumble, apple pie, apple fritters, or whatever. That working seasonally is really like the fundamental rhythm of life. And so it is with decorating. Decorate your house slowly and steadily up to Christmas with a big push towards the very end, and enjoy what you've done. If you like having a tree, that's fine. But think about alternatives, and let it go. Get it all in like bright order on Christmas Eve. Celebrate for the 12 days of Christmas, and then take it down. But replace it with something else. I'm reminded of my last trip to Sarawak in Borneo, where I went up into the Dayak Mountains, where my old Oxford advisor did his fieldwork in the 1950s. And it was splendid. I went for a particular festival, Gawai Dayak, in June, and all the houses in Long Banga, where I was staying, still had their Christmas decorations up. They love Christmas, so that there was, I don't think there was actually a tree in any of the houses, but there was certainly all like festoons of garlands and tinsel and Merry Christmas signs and Santa and whatever. It just seems so odd to be in the height of the summer season, or they're like Cambodia, it's not really a season, but it was the height of the hot weather, and there's Santa staring at me from the walls. They just love Christmas. Well, I don't like that idea. I mean, they can do it, that's their tradition, but I like to take the decorations down on Epiphany and think about something else, something that will inspire me for the next season, and then the next, and then the next, so that I have an annual rhythm. I'm also going to lament the fact that with the advent of the internet, people don't send Christmas cards anymore. Now, I don't receive Christmas cards here in Cambodia because the postal service doesn't really work, and I can't get letters or cards. I can get packages. I've already got my Christmas package from my sister laid out by my wreath, but I don't get cards. But back when I was living in New York, I also noticed a huge tail off as the internet got going and people started being able to send e-cards. Before that, my wife and I used to design our own card every year. We used to draw a design on the front and then photocopy a bunch and fold it up and send it off to our friends and relatives and so forth. Usually somewhere in the neighborhood of about 200 cards, and we'd get some, not quite 200, but we'd get quite a lot back. And I used to string ribbons in the living room by the lights and have all the cards sorted out in the room. And it was very like friendly, I guess. It was like a feeling of my community of friends and family all sharing Christmas with me. And that all started tailing off as the internet got more and more popular. And I lament that. I mean, I do also kind of lament writing letters to people and having written letters back, because I like the feel of a letter in my hand in a person's own handwriting. Email doesn't have that same personal touch, but I do like the fact that I can send an email and get a reply within hours or days, whereas in the old days I used to write a letter to a good old university colleague of mine from my undergraduate days who lived in Kenya, and I used to send him a letter and he used to reply, and it used to be an exchange of about 2 a month. It was very exciting when I got a letter, but it was very rare. Whereas once we both were hooked up into the internet, then we went back and forth every day, and that's fun. It's not fun to send out more emails than I get back, but that's the nature of things. So my suggestion, I won't call it advice, my suggestion is that you decorate slowly into the season until you get to Christmas, when it's all full blown. Keep everything alive and light and joyous until Epiphany, and then take it all down and put something else up in its place that represents the new season, and keep doing that all year. So Tuesday, I think I'm going to go back to doing a recipe. I'm not sure yet. I want to give you my wife's Kentucky eggnog recipe, because homemade eggnog is absolutely wonderful. The stuff you buy in supermarkets that's pre-packaged is awful. I mean, add enough rum or brandy or whatever, and it goes down well, I guess. But homemade eggnog is magnificent, and I want to give you that recipe. And I'm not sure what else, but maybe I'll show you marzipan decorating of my Christmas cake. Not sure. But have a good weekend, and I'll see you on Tuesday.